Most Americans don't know this, but in 1898, the only successful coup d'etat in U.S. history didn't happen in some distant, unstable country. It wasn't orchestrated by a foreign power. It happened right here, in the prosperous port city of Wilmington, North Carolina. A democratically elected government was overthrown by force, by a mob of its own citizens. This event has been buried by history, deliberately erased from our national memory. So here's the question we must confront. If democracy could be violently dismantled once in America, what does that reveal about the fragility of the institutions we trust and the country we think we know? To understand how it happened, you first have to understand what was lost. In the decades after the Civil War, Wilmington was a rare and stunning symbol of progress in the American South. It was North Carolina's largest city, a bustling hub of commerce and opportunity, where the promise of Reconstruction wasn't just a fading dream, it was a lived reality. The city's prosperity was built on a foundation of genuine biracial cooperation. Black citizens weren't just a source of labor, they were an integral part of the economy. They were skilled artisans, successful business owners, doctors, and lawyers. They owned property, paid taxes, and contributed to a thriving Black middle class. Politically, they had achieved what seemed impossible elsewhere in the South. Through a powerful fusion coalition of Black Republicans and white populists, they had defeated the white supremacist Democratic Party. Black men served as city aldermen, magistrates, and police officers. They had a real voice in their own governance. This economic and political success nurtured a vibrant cultural life. Schools and churches were the cornerstones of the community, reflecting a growing, educated, and aspirational population. Families built homes, founded social clubs, and even ran a successful daily newspaper, the Daily Record, which gave voice to their perspectives and ambitions. In an era when Jim Crow laws were beginning to suffocate the rest of the South, Wilmington stood apart. It was a beacon of Black advancement and a working model of an integrated society. To many, both Black and white, Wilmington didn't just look like a successful city, it looked like the future of a truly reconstructed America. But this beacon of progress cast a long and threatening shadow in the eyes of the old guard. For the state's white supremacist elite, who were losing their grip on power, Wilmington wasn't the future. It was an intolerable aberration that had to be extinguished. So if Wilmington was the future, you have to ask yourself, why did so many people decide to burn it all to the ground? The plot was meticulously planned in the shadows by a group of the city's most powerful white men, who called themselves the Secret Nine. These weren't fringe extremists. They were lawyers, businessmen, and former Confederate officers, the city's elite. Their goal was to dismantle Wilmington's successful multiracial government by any means necessary. They drafted a document they called the White Declaration of Independence. It was a chilling manifesto, a pledge that they would never again be ruled by men of African origin and a direct threat to use force to achieve their aims. To turn public opinion, they launched a vicious propaganda campaign. Newspapers like the Wilmington Messenger became weapons, printing sensationalized lies designed to stir racial fear and hatred. They fabricated stories of Black criminality, painting a false narrative of a city under threat from its own prosperous Black citizens. This campaign of fear laid the groundwork for violence. Armed groups like the Red Shirts and the White Government Union began to gather. They weren't just concerned citizens, they were paramilitary forces, marching through the streets to intimidate Black voters and their white allies. They weren't preparing to compete in democracy, they were preparing to destroy it. This wasn't politics. It was a calculated campaign of disinformation and intimidation. It was fear, deliberately manufactured and weaponized. And that fear turned into hate. So I ask, when we see coordinated media campaigns stoking division today, are we seeing the echoes of this same pattern? The election came and went, but the fusionist government held on. For the conspirators, democracy had failed to deliver their desired outcome. So, 2 days later, on the morning of November 10, 1898, they unleashed their plan. Armed mobs, thousands strong, filled the streets. Their first target was the heart of the Black community's voice, the Daily Record, the state's only Black-owned daily newspaper. They stormed the offices, smashing the printing press that had dared to challenge their narrative. Then they burned the building to the ground, a symbolic act to silence Black dissent. But the violence didn't stop there. It spilled into the streets and neighborhoods. White mobs, emboldened and armed, roamed the city with impunity. Black-owned businesses were looted and destroyed. Homes were invaded. Families were terrorized. The exact number of victims is lost to history, but we know dozens, and possibly hundreds of black citizens were murdered in cold blood. It was a massacre. Those who could fled for their lives. Thousands of men, women, and children escaped into the cold November swamps and woods, leaving behind everything they had built. They became refugees in their own land, hunted by their neighbors. While the city was gripped by terror, the final act of the coup took place. The conspirators marched to City Hall. At gunpoint, they forced the legally elected mayor, the board of aldermen, and the police chief to resign. In their place, the white supremacists declared themselves the new rulers of Wilmington. It was the only successful coup d'etat in American history. In a single bloody day, a thriving, prosperous, and democratically elected government was overthrown. The promise of Reconstruction was extinguished. Democracy in Wilmington was destroyed, replaced by a brutal regime of white supremacy. In the immediate aftermath, a chilling silence fell over Wilmington. The gunshots faded, but the terror lingered in the air. The city's thriving black middle class, a beacon of post-Reconstruction hope, was systematically dismantled in a matter of hours. Homes were looted and burned. Businesses, built over decades with sweat and ambition, were stolen or shuttered forever. The economic heart of the community was ripped out, its leaders murdered or banished. An estimated 2,000 black citizens fled for their lives, becoming political refugees in their own country. They scattered into the cold, unforgiving swamps, hiding from the mobs that hunted them. Many never returned, their property deeds and family histories lost to the chaos. They became a diaspora of the displaced, their stories scattered to the winds. Wilmington was not just attacked, it was purged. The city's demographics were forcibly and permanently altered. And the message sent from Wilmington echoed with terrifying clarity across the entire South. It was a blueprint for repression. White supremacist leaders in other states watched and learned. They saw that political violence, when branded as restoring order, could succeed without federal intervention. The coup became a catalyst, accelerating the rise of the Jim Crow regime. It emboldened lawmakers to pass a wave of discriminatory legislation designed to codify white supremacy into law. Suddenly, poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses weren't just ideas. They were proven tools of disenfranchisement. The coup provided the political cover to implement them on a massive scale. For the next 60 years, these laws would systematically strip African Americans of their right to vote, their political voice, and their basic human dignity, ensuring that a multiracial democracy like the one that had briefly flourished in Wilmington could never take root again. But perhaps the most insidious part of the coup was the silence that followed. The perpetrators, now firmly in power, immediately began to rewrite history. They controlled the newspapers, the government, and the official records. The massacre was reframed, its truth deliberately buried under layers of falsehood. For decades, official accounts and school textbooks labeled the event a race riot, a spontaneous eruption of violence instigated by the black community itself. This lie was crucial. Calling it a riot blamed the victims and absolved the murderers. Calling it a coup would have been an admission of treason. This calculated act of historical malpractice erased the political nature of the attack, obscuring the fact that it was an organized, violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. The truth wasn't just lost, it was actively suppressed. While the official story was a fiction, the true story survived. It lived on in hushed tones, passed down from parents to children behind closed doors. Survivors and their descendants carried the trauma and the truth, becoming a living archive of a memory America refused to acknowledge. They whispered the names of the dead, the details of the escape, the pain of what was stolen. But for the rest of the country, it was as if it never happened. America simply looked away. It's no accident that most Americans today have never heard of the Wilmington coup of 1898. The campaign of silence and erasure was devastatingly effective. But knowing this story is essential because it fundamentally changes how we understand the narrative of American progress. Wilmington reveals a chilling truth. Democracy is not a destination we have arrived at, but a fragile process that can be reversed. The events of 1898 were not an anomaly, they were a warning. A warning about what happens when political rhetoric turns to dehumanization, when misinformation is weaponized to justify violence, and when democratic institutions are not defended. The story of Wilmington forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. If a government can be overthrown once on American soil, what is to stop it from happening again? Will we recognize the warning signs today, or will we, like so many did after 1898, choose to look away? Remembering Wilmington is not just an act of historical recovery, it is an act of civic responsibility. If you believe that these hidden histories must be brought into the light, not just as stories of tragedy, but as vital lessons for our future, then please help us ensure this memory is never buried again. Share this video with someone who needs to know this story. Subscribe to join our community as we continue to uncover the forgotten chapters of American history. I'm Rondia Kaufer. Thank you for watching.